This time, you will learn how United Nations formed and its contribution to the contemporary world governance. Global governance refers to the various intersecting processes that creates international order. Global governance can be thus understood as the sum of laws, norms, policies, and institutions that define, constitute, and mediate trans-border relations between states, culture, citizens, intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations, and the market. The fact that states in an international order continue to adhere to a certain global norms means that there is a semblance of world order despite the lack of a single world government. The goal of global governance, roughly defined, is to provide global public goods, particularly peace and security, justice, and mediation systems for conflict, functioning markets, and unified standards for trade and industry. And the source of global governance is international non-governmental organizations. Though not having a formal state power, international non-governmental organizations can lobby powerful states to behave in a certain way. For example, an international animal protection NGO can pressure governments to pass animal cruelty laws. Powerful transnational corporations can likewise have tremendous effects on global labor laws, environmental legislation, trade policy, etc. Even ideas such as the need for global democracy or the clamor for good governance can influence the ways international actors behave. So international non-governmental organizations are not-profit voluntary associations operating at the international, transnational, or global with members of participants from many countries, are growing in both numbers and influence around the world. INGOs range wildly in scope, size, membership, and home location. Examples of INGOs include human rights and Doctors Without Borders. INGOs have increasingly been involved in the policy making and the policy process. So under this international non-governmental organization is the international organization, as a term commonly used to refer to international intergovernmental organizations or groups that are primarily made of member states. An international organization is one that includes members from more than one nation. Some international organizations are very large, such as business corporations. Others are small and dedicated to a specific purpose, such as conservation of a species. One of the fallacies about international organization is that they merely amalgamations of various states' interests. One of the more invisible international non-governmental organizations in the world is the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement today. The Red Cross is synonymous with work with the victims of humanitarian crises. There are many success stories of how these international organizations, once thought to be tools of states, have come into their own and set the agenda for the international community. Nowhere is more evident than in the area of environmental preservation. So many scholars believe that international organizations were just venues where the contradicting but sometimes intersecting agendas of countries discussed, no more than talk shops. What has become more evident in recent years, however, is that IOIS can take lives on their own. And for your information, international organizations can thus become influential as independent organizations with the listed following powers. It could be have the power of classification. It could be have the power to fix meanings. And it could be have the power to diffuse norms. So let's discuss the following powers of international organization. First, IOS have the power of classification. Yes, indeed, because IOS can invent and apply categories, they create powerful global standards. Example of these is the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, or the UNHCR defines what refugee is, and since the states are required to accept refugees entering their borders, this power to establish identity has concrete effects. On the top of this slide presentation is the logo of the UNHCR. It has a mandate to provide international protection and assistance to refugees, and together with governments, find solutions to their plight. UNHCR also protects stateless persons and works to prevent and reduce statelessness. It acts as global cluster lead for protection and co-leadership in the area of camp coordination, management, and emergency shelter in respect of internally displaced persons. Second is the IOS of the power to fix meanings. This is a broader function related to the first. Various terms like security or development need to be well defined. States, organizations, and individuals view IOS as legitimate sources of information. Example: recently, United Nations has started to define security as not just safety from military violence, but also from environmental harm. So the IOS has the command to create a concrete definition based on their level has been structured to every state member. Through various wars and conflict, the United Nations state-specific definition, as mentioned, security, covers any form of it in order to maintain peace and order and development, setting standards in considering a state or a country as developed. The last is IOS have the power to diffuse norms. Barnett and Fenimore emphasize the missionaries of our time. Their power to diffuse norms stems from the fact that IOS are staffed with independent bureaucracies who are considered experts in various fields. So, one possible explanation will then be offered by arguing that IO and identities are not fixed and that IOS are norm consumers as well as norm diffusers. The argument will then be made that IOS are shaped by states and non-state actors such as non-governmental organizations and transnational advocacy networks. The fact that an IO may change its identity in order to diffuse specific norms is important. An organization's identity is defined as the organization's bureaucratic culture based on its dominant profession, which informs how this mandate is undertaken and how the organization is perceived. So for example, World Bank economists come to be regarded as experts in development and thus carry some form of authority. They can therefore create norms regarding the implementation and conceptualization of development projects. So the argument that international norms shape states was expounded in more detail in the book National Interest in International Society, where it provides an additional 2 cases of how both international organizations and international non-governmental organizations diffused international norms to states. One involving the World Bank diffusing norms of poverty amelioration within development. Another involving the transmission of norms of humanitarian conduct during warfare by International Committee of the Red Cross. So because of these immense powers, IOS can be sources of the great good and great harm. They can promote relevant norms like environmental protection and human rights, but like other entrenched bureaucracies, they can become shield of communities that fail to challenge their beliefs. Furthermore, Joseph Stiglitz, a World Bank economist, famously criticized the IMF for using a one-size-fits-all approach when its economists made recommendations to developing countries. He made his feelings about the IMF austerity packages plain enough when he argued that you don't want to push these countries into severe recession. One ought to focus on things that cause the crisis, not on things that make it more difficult to deal with. After such time, United Nations formed after the collapse of League of Nations. Countries worried about another global war began to push for the formation of a more lasting league. The result was the creation of United Nations. Although the organization is far from perfect, it should be emphasized that it has so far achieved its primary goal of averting another global war. For this reason alone, the UN should be considered a success. So the United Nations is an international organization of countries. It was created for many reasons. There should be peace and security in the world after the Second World War. Countries should be friendly to each other. Countries should help each other solve problems. And human rights should be respected everywhere in the world. So it consists of 5 organs. And these organs perform its duty to maintain its primary goals to avoid war, promote peace and order, and diplomatic relationship to all nations. Membership is open to all peace-loving nations. Today, there are more than 200 countries in the UN. Only very few have not become members. Earlier, I presented to you the 5 organs of United Nations. This time, we are about to discuss each of these organs. And so we start with the General Assembly. It is main deliberative, policy-making, and representative organ. According to the UN Charter, decisions on important questions such as those on peace and security, admission of new members, and budgetary matters require a 2/3 majority of the General Assembly. Annually, the General Assembly elects a General Assembly President to serve 1-year term of office. It discusses problems and recommends ways to solve them, which many heads of state attend and address. Decisions on more important such as those of security and peace, admission of new members, and budgetary members are required. Second is the Security Council. Many commentators consider this as to be the most powerful. This body consists of 15 members. The General Assembly elects 10 of these 15 2-year terms. The other 5 sometimes referred to as the permanent 5, such as China, France, Russia, United Kingdom, and United States. So this is the main body of the UN. It gets together almost every day, and it has the most powerful organ whose primary responsibility is the maintenance of international peace and security. Aside from that, it takes the lead in determining the existence of the threat to the peace or an act of aggression. It calls upon the parties to a dispute to settle the act by peaceful means and recommends methods of adjustment or terms of settlement. In some cases, it can resort to imposing sanctions or even authorizing the use of force to maintain or restore international peace and security. With this, the Security Council approval, a military intervention may be deemed legal. This is an immense power. Much attention has been placed on the Security Council's 5P due to their permanent seats and because each country holds veto power over the Council's decisions. It only takes 1 veto vote from a permanent 5 members to stop a Security Council action in its tracks. Next is the Economic and Social Council. The principal body for coordination, policy review, policy dialogue, and recommendations on social and environmental issues, as well as the implementation of elected over 3-year terms, were discussed or constrained of this organ. Currently, it is the UN central platform for discussion on sustainable development. It serves as the central mechanism for activities of the UN system and its specialized agencies in the economic, social, environmental field, supervising subsidiary and expert bodies. The fourth is the International Court of Justice. In this organ, it is to settle, in accordance with international law, legal disputes submitted to it by states and to give advisory opinions referred to it by authorized United Nations organ and specialized agencies. The major cases of the courts consist of disputes between states that voluntarily submit themselves before the court's authority. The SC may inform the rulings of the ICJ, but he remains subject to the permanent five's veto power. So the International Court of Justice regulates disputes concerning human issues that are not related to just one country, as well as international disputes among things like borders and pollution. The court has two functions: to settle in accordance with the international law and to give advisory opinions on legal questions referred to it by authorized UN organized or organs and specialized agencies. The court decisions are binding and its broad jurisdiction encompasses all which the parties refer to it and all matters specially provided for in the Charter of the United Nations and treaties and convention informs. Most importantly, states may not be parties to dispute without their consent, though they may accept the compulsory jurisdiction of the court in specific categories of disputes. The court may give advisory opinions at the request of the General Assembly or the Security Council or at the request of other organs and specialized agencies authorized by the Assembly. The last organ is the Secretariat. Finally, the Secretariat consists of Secretary General and 10,000s of international UN staff members who carry out the day-to-day work of the UN as mandated by General Assembly and the organizations of other principal organs. As such, it is bureaucracy of the UN, serving as a kind of international civil service. Members of the Secretariat serve in their capacity as UN employees and not as state representatives. So UN staff members are recruited internationally and locally and work in duty stations and on peacekeeping missions all around the world. But serving the cause of peace in the violent world is dangerous occupation. Since the founding of the United Nations, hundreds of brave men and women have been given their lives in its service. The Secretary General serves as the Chief Administrative Officer at all meetings and carries out any functions that those organs entrust to the Secretariat. He also oversees the preparation of the UN's budget. The Secretary General has important political functions, being charged with bringing before the organizations any matter that threatens international peace and security. So let's proceed to the challenges of the United Nations. 1. It limits place upon its various organs and programs by the need to respect state sovereignty. The UN is not a government, and it functions primarily because of voluntary cooperation from the states. If the states refuse to cooperate, the influence of the UN can be severely circumscribed. Example, UN Council on Human Rights can send special rapporteurs to countries where alleged human rights violations are occurring. Second, issue of security. The UN Security Council is tasked with authorizing international acts of military intervention. Because of the five veto power, it is tough for the Council to release a formal resolution, much more implement in it. Example, the Kosovo War between United States of America and Serbia. In this war, Slobodan Milosevic was committing acts of ethnic cleansing against ethnic Muslim Albanians in the province of massacres, mass deportations, and internal displacement. So looking today, similar dynamic is evident in Syria, which is undergoing a civil war. Russia has threatened to veto any Security Council resolution against Syria. Thus, the UN has done very little to stop state-sanctioned violence against opponents of the government. Since Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is an ally of Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, the latter has shied away from any policy that could weaken the legitimacy of former. As a result, the UN is again ineffectual amid a conflict that has led to over 220,000 people dead and 11 million displaced. Security has also made right decision. It is when the United States sought the invade in Iraq in 2001, it claimed that Iraq's Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction that threatened the world. In the wake of September 11 attacks in the United States in 2001, the US government asserting that Saddam might provide terrorist groups with chemical or biological weapons sought to renew the disarmament process. Though Saddam allowed UN weapons inspectors to return to Iraq in November 2012, his failure to cooperate fully with investigations frustrated the Organization of the United States and Great Britain and led them to declare an end to diplomacy. However, UN members Russia, China, France were unconvinced and vetoed the UN resolution for intervention, forcing the United States to lead a small coalition of the willing with its allies. So for the conclusion, this study or this lesson focused on the IOS and the United Nations. UN as closest to world government and institutions like the UN are always in a precarious position. So this presentation gives background on how the international organizations exist through founding United Nations, embarking the beginning of peace and unity, upholding international order by understanding the creation of United Nations as one of the major non-governmental organizations yet powerful at the present. It is somehow this organization had been the framework of international relations despite the ruling of great powers